Let's talk Ranch Loop. What's your take on that one?
What an event. I got to say that what Dave Castro did with this event by surprising the athletes with an unexpected doubling of the distance by making them go out and back was, I thought, a great twist. Because we always talk about CrossFit as being unknowable, and we always are given workouts where we can come up with a strategy. And that's really important because we don't have infinite energy. And what we want to do is we want to time the consumption of our available energy based upon the workload or the time domain that we're tasked with. And when these athletes are coming to this event, this is event 5 on the first day. So they're already crushed and they've got 2 more days coming. And so what a perfect time to test not only the physical side, but when they are told to do basically a flip turn and retrace their steps and double their overall distance, now we have an emotional and a mental aspect. And it's not often that we see those things tested. You know, one of the things that we saw when they programmed a marathon row is limitations in a lot of athletes, because that 26.2 mile row was a true endurance event, and not in terms of pain. That wasn't their difficulty. It was essentially in terms of boredom, that they hadn't done anything that was 3+ hours, even in training. And so part of it is that became an emotional and mental barrier just because of time. This one presents a whole nother situation because you had planned for a certain set of variables and that didn't happen. So that to me was incredible. You know, but we're looking at the start here. I love the fact that they started everybody at the same time, but what I'm seeing is, you know, it's obviously very close to 3, 2, 1 go time, but look at nobody. What are they? They're not wearing heart watches. So part of it is that, yeah, you know what? I see Fraser, I'm sure Carrie Pierce, they've got wrist watches and the wrist is getting heart rate information for them. No doubt that is occurring there. But the accuracy of using, you know, heart rate from a wrist is significantly different than using a chest strap. You know, when we talk about accuracy, the reason why chest straps are used is because of the level of accuracy with them. You know, these chest straps are somewhere around, you know, 70% more accurate than using a wrist type calibration. So to use it on your wrist, it's almost like it's a false read of what your level of intensity is. So I'm a little bit surprised because, you know, controlling heart rate and awareness in an event like this, which they're fully prepared, it was going to take them at least 30 minutes, right, to do this opening 5K. That would matter. That would matter a lot. So I'm a little bit surprised by that with this event and seeing that. But yeah, let's fire this thing up and talk about this event as it goes through. I really like Tia and what she's doing. Look at her. She is race ready. She's ready to go. And she's been sitting there in that position for some time. Now, the positioning of these athletes is interesting to me. The 2 guys sitting behind and pacing essentially off of Fraser is interesting for me. It shows that they respect what Fraser's ability in running, which is smart. Let's just keep an eye on him and control our intensity based upon his intensity. To attack Fraser, especially in a 5K run, I would say that's a mistake. Fraser is very confident and he has been proven to be very skilled in his running. Now, what's fascinating also is that, you know, at the start, and I don't know if it was by design, but both Tia and Matt had a pole position on the turn. That's very important. You know, one of the things that athletes are always doing is doing assessments of others. And when you look over and someone has a strategic advantage because of their positioning, there is a weakening in that athlete. They see an advantage, and that immediately strikes in them as that's unfair. And the problem is that unfairness was based on them. They just didn't actually put themselves in the proper position. And so tactics is incredibly important. Matt and Tia are incredible tacticians. They're aware of what they need to do to establish and preserve their dominance over the field. So one of the things that Matt loves to do is to test people. He loves to almost toy with them. I'm going to go out and I'm going to push my intensity in the beginning and see who has the courage to go with me. And that's the threat, the person with the courage, because Matt always believes that when it comes down to that final finish, he's going to outkick you. He's going to outwill you for that win. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about here was the grades. You know, in the event where they carried the sandbag up this hill, the average grade was 20%. The steepest grade was 35%. Well, in this, they have a grade that is 50%. And one of the things that, you know, it's not a bad thing by running uphill at a 50% grade or walking up a hill at a 50% grade. It's the descent. That's where the true damage is going to occur. Downhill running is without a doubt the most dangerous form of running that there is. And I'm not talking about balance and stability and agility issues. What I'm talking about is that when you are striding downhill, your leg is reaching because the ground is much further away than when you are running on flats, and certainly making contact with the ground is much further away than running uphill. So your leg has to reach. Essentially, it overextends itself, it overstrides itself. And so when you make contact with the ground, you have an entire lengthening of the leg. And then you have massive impact forces when the ground makes contact with the foot. And that's where the damage occurs. New athletes that are doing a downhill running workout, they will have soreness for 3+ weeks afterwards. That's how much damage is occurring. And so part of it is that, you know, when you're looking at this downhill portion here, these athletes, they very well know that this is going to have a lasting effect, but they're throwing caution into the wind because this is race day. And you know what? I'm in the now. I can't worry about anything that comes after this. I got to go. And so they're attacking this. And that is going to really pay a price. Now, what is fortunate is everybody's giving it the gas. Everybody's actually creating the same level of damage in this workout. And so the overall net is minimal. But every one of them is on the throttle and they're pushing. The key is, I look at this and it's 5,000 meters. That's the estimated distance. Okay, 5,000 meters. You know what? That is still an aggressive intensity. You know, when we talk about it 30 minutes, that would be a moderate pace. But to put that moderate pace into action for 30 minutes over these ups and downs, that's going to create a whole new set of difficulties for these athletes. This is considered, for these athletes, a very difficult event because of the change in terrain. There are things with footing, your alertness, that are real. And this is one of the events, almost like a box jump, where it could take an athlete out just by a mishap. And the question that I had when watching it is, who's going to take those risks? Because if you always do what everybody else does, then why would you expect to finish any differently? You got to do something extraordinary. Now, look at Fraser in this workout. Here's a guy that has already dominated in the first 4 events, and yet he is going for it here. He's making an effort to truly show that he wants this win. He's not taking it for granted. And he's attacking. I mean, look at the other guys in the field and what they're doing in comparison. Matt Fraser is pushing. And that's what appeals to me. Now, what's interesting here is Tia coming up. Tia, same thing. You know, Matt and Tia training together, they both have that frame of mind where we need to establish ourselves. We need to make sure that the other athletes know that we're going to fight. And so taking an early lead, such as this, on an uphill portion, is doing exactly that. It's a game of intimidation, because this sport, one of the things that you have to worry about is who's coming up from behind, because places matter. The points matter. And so, yeah, you want to do well, but the fact is, if these athletes catch you, now you may lose a place. And so you're worried not only about what's in front of you, but you're equally worried about what's behind you. Now, I'm surprised in this. You know, honestly, I see Katrin, and, you know, I know Katrin really well. I know her running. I know her capabilities. This workout is made for her. It's very challenging, and she is, without a doubt, the competent runner as far as this time domain over all the other women in the field. And I'm a little surprised at how conservative she is in the beginning and allowing other athletes to go. But the thing that Katrin does have that other athletes don't is she's aware of where her maximum sustainable intensity is. She knows that she can't go faster than that. If she does, there will be a massive price that she pays. So what she does is she stays below that lactate threshold intensity until she gets close enough to the finish line where she wants to take a risk and make a move for the finish. And so she's making this about her ability, and she's limiting her speed based upon that ability. She's playing with that edge of the envelope intensity, and she's riding that until just at the point where she knows she's close enough to that finish line where she could take the risk.
Okay.
So that really sets up the stage for these athletes.
Okay. Talking about Katrin again, could that be a dangerous strategy? I mean, it's obviously smart. It's obviously, you know yourself, but could that be also dangerous if the other people are just reckless and maybe they're right with this kind of a reckless approach?
Yeah, so here's the thing is that these athletes know that this workout is going to be at least that 30-minute time domain. And so Katrin is very aware that a consistent intensity from beginning to end is going to be the fastest approach. And what she's measuring her intensity on is heart rate, which is a very good way to do it because it levels out the uphills and the downhill. So if you're maintaining relatively the same heart rate, which she knows where her lactate threshold intensity is in terms of heart rate in the movement of running. And that's important because every movement has its own unique threshold intensity, right? And so she knows in the movement of running where it is. Now, an opposite approach would be, I'm going to go up the hills, and what I'm going to do is my heart rate's going to soar, and I'm going to have it above my maximum sustainable pace. Essentially, now I'm dying. I'm creating more fatigue in my body than is actually leaving. And so what's going to happen is that we are going to end up having, for that athlete, a slowing. So their thought process is, maybe I need to slow down on the downhill and recover. The problem is that the uphills on this course are way too long to actually sustain it for a long duration. And what will happen is those athletes that go over their maximum sustainable pace on the beginning of the uphill are going to be walking at a very slow rate of speed at the top of the hill because they can't sustain that intensity. And so Katrin, without a doubt, has the smartest strategy in this. She is doing what she can in that moment. Now, the other athletes, they're attacking. And I got to say, to be controlled when other athletes attack, that is a very, very difficult thing to do. So what we see is these athletes running up that hill and keep plugging up that hill. And the first thing I look at for fatigue is a breaking in the waist. As soon as they start leaning over, like you're sitting at a desk in an office and you lean over to type, that is the sign that you see in terms of fatigue. That's the first sign. And so what we're seeing from Tia is that she is working really hard. Now look at Haley behind her. Look at the body positioning between the two. Tia's bent at the waist and she's tired. She's really, really fatigued right here. She's moving as quickly as she possibly can, but she's gassing. And that is because of an early attack. She established her dominance early. She built an early lead, but look at the length of this hill. And parts of this hill are at a 50% grade. And so now you're paying a price. You can't sustain an unsustainable pace forever. And so when we look at the athletes and the body style, Haley Adams is much more upright. She is now still using her hip flexors and her glute medius to allow her to move. And in time, what I'm going to expect in watching this is that, you know, Haley is going to make a contention for first place in this event by passing Tia. That's what I would fully expect based upon body style while movement. This is a hill and a half. Now, for me, if I was doing this hill, I wouldn't be so worried about the uphill. You know, using your hands on your legs is by far, it's the way to go. I know it doesn't seem like it's going to matter a lot, but that extra hand pressure in helping the legs reach extension matters. It's going to be a huge value for them. Much more valuable than having the arm swing and the power transfer from upper body to lower body. You know, that value of arm swing matters in sprinting. But as far as here, it's really focusing on recovery, meaning if we can get our slow twitch fibers moving, they're going to burn some of that accumulated lactate, pull it out of the bloodstream and consume it as a fuel, meaning it's going to help us recover by doing a more gradual arm swing. But the value of pushing on your legs like Matt's doing there is way more valuable than having the arm swing. Now, this is interesting to me. Haley catches Tia and then stops in right behind her. Now, why is that? You know, one of the things that athletes do is they are judging their ability based upon others. And, you know, when athletes reach this point right here, and, you know, Haley doesn't have a watch, so she has no clue on what distance and where she is, which is a mistake. You should have some idea where you are. And, you know, if I was them, I would be wearing a watch that had GPS. Now, maybe they're not allowed to do that, but I wasn't aware of that rule. But what Haley, by slowing down, it tells you a lot. She's relying on Tia and the level of exertion. She stops in and tucks right behind Tia. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's much easier to follow than it is to lead. But Haley, what's happening is that her brain is assessing her level of fatigue, and it's trying to figure out how much distance do I have remaining. And if I push too hard, I may not have enough energy to bring it home. And so you take a more conservative approach. And so by looking at what Tia is doing, it's easy to be influenced by that. And let's face it, Tia is the champion. And so if you're out in front with Tia, especially on a run, because she's no slouch in terms of running, it might not be a bad strategy. But it's interesting now, like technique-wise, Haley, you know, who doesn't bend at the waist when she runs, she's now starting to bend at the waist and mimicking that movement pattern. Now look at this downhill. I got to say that Matt attacks this thing, and Matt is one of the smartest athletes that I have ever met. He knows the damage that's going to occur running downhill. And so he can be more conservative running downhill because of the lead. But wow, look at the amount of damage that is occurring here. I mean, this is what's called a free fall in the running of the downhill. Yeah. Wow. So that's Medeiros. And Medeiros, you know, one of the things is he's a very tall kid. He's a very, very tall kid. What helps these athletes, also CrossFit athletes, is its strength. So, you know, we see in ultra races that are 50K and longer, we see a much different type of athlete. The men, they have a tendency to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, more quad strength. And that is something that gives them more resiliency on these downhill sections. You know, the other thing is look at the arm swing. So one of the things that's interesting about what their arm mechanics, and Noah was really good at that, was almost using the arms to damper the shock. He's taking some of the weight off when the impact is made, when the foot makes contact with the ground. You know, Haley just slipped and fell there. I mean, that's one of the risks in following, is that you don't have much visibility. You know, when you run downhill, you can't look as far forward, meaning the chin position needs to be facing down. And Haley has some of the best running form of any CrossFit athlete that I've ever watched. Her running technique it's beautiful. And when we have good running technique, our chin is parallel to the ground. We're sighted and looking forward. We want to keep our chest up. If we look down, we have a tendency to break at the hips, and that shortens our stride length. We want to make sure that we can open up our hips so that we can take advantage of that stretch reflex in the hip flexor, allows our foot to swing forward by itself with less energy. And one of the things that Haley, you know, when she drops and has to drop her chin in order to see looking down, her technique changes because she doesn't run that way. And that's something to think about moving forward, is that if you're always running in this perfect position, are you geared for downhill type running form, downhill technique? Look at this. So this to me is shocking. So Medeiros literally makes a move and tries to go after Fraser on this downhill section. And honestly, if he's going to make a move based upon the amount of distance that he made up on Fraser on this downhill, that might be a smart thing. But Fraser's no toy. I mean, that's the thing, is that he is doing nothing more than, okay, you want to play the game? I'm going to show you how to play the game because I make the rules. And he is going to make him pay. Almost now, Matt can treat him as a toy. And this will be something of entertainment for Matt. Keep him occupied. Because you know what? Medeiros is creating, you know, in my opinion, a real threat. He's not intimidated at all. He's doing his own thing. And look at this, the difference between the two. They're thinking differently. So now they're coming down this long section. Remember, they had a long uphill, and they're making their way right now back towards the ranch. They've got these long uphills and downhill sections. And part of it is that Matt knows that he's got about 10 minutes left. So this is where wearing a watch becomes important. You need information. You've got to have an idea of where that finish line is, because you're about to make a decision. And that decision is, I need to go into a non-sustainable pace. I need to start making my move. I need to begin my sprint to the finish line. And so at what point in time do you do that? So if you know an event is 30 minutes, what you want to do is you want to have a nice consistent intensity from beginning until the point where you make the move. And where would that be? For me, you know what? I'd start making my move at around 6 minutes out. At 6 minutes out, I feel like I'm close enough to the finish line where I could take a very calculated risk. Because the key here is that I'm going to drain all of my available energy, my remaining energy, to get me to that finish line. I know once I cross that line, I can lay on the ground. And that's what makes this workout really tough. They're not done when they think they're done. So now, watching Fraser here, he's doing it smart. He's just sitting off the shoulder, not thinking. These two guys, they're not worried about who's behind them anymore. It's clear it's just them. They know that they're close enough to the finish line where they don't have to worry about anything behind. So what does Matt do? He's collecting information. He's looking at his body language. Part of it is that the first thing I would do is I would start looking at how high the shoulders are creeping up around the ears. The shoulders, it's where the tension gets held. And what happens with athletes is that their shoulders begin to rise as they fatigue. And when that occurs, their stride length, because of this tension, gets shorter and shorter and shorter. That is a sure sign that someone's hurting when those shoulders start hunching. Now, to me, that was interesting. So Medeiros is running and decides to walk. Fraser was running, and as soon as Medeiros walked, Fraser walked. So if I was Medeiros, I'm thinking I'm controlling Matt Fraser right now. I'm actually in the driver's seat because he is mimicking my movement patterns. And part of it is that Matt Fraser is recognizing I'm too far from the finish line to make a move. Why pass him if I can't continue to keep the pressure on? All that's going to happen is that Medeiros is going to match him. So Matt wants to make a move when he's willing to take that risk all the way to the finish line. And that's what he's doing. He's going to sit and wait until he's at that point where it's like, you know what? I'm making my move, and if you want to join me, but I'm going. And so that's really what is exciting for me is right now, these two athletes are thinking that. When's he making his move? When am I making my move? And where is that finish line? Because remember, the brain is always assessing your level of fatigue with the remaining distance you have. That's why when people get to do a mile for time and they're doing 3 laps around the track, they always slow down on that 3rd lap because they're afraid that they can't maintain that same intensity. And so they slow down. Look at that. So to me, this is interesting. As soon as Tia hits that hill, she immediately starts walking. Now it shows their level of fatigue. Haley was clearly picking up speed on that flat downhill section. And so that's a boost for Haley. Haley should recognize that she's got some speed in the downhill and the flat section against Tia. Tia also is struggling here with the uphill. I do not think that this is a muscular fatigue. I mean, I think that she's obviously muscular tired, but what's happened is that she's now paying a price, Tia is, for that early attack. And what's happened is her slow twitch fibers are gassed out. She's fatigued them. And so the only way for her to now move up this hill is fast twitch fibers. Unfortunately, that's creating lactic acid. And that lactic acid, as the hill progresses, is going to accumulate. She's going to get more and more of that. Haley, by having a more conservative early approach, does not have that accumulation of lactic acid. So she's just able to move at a faster rate of speed because she's just got more available muscle fibers to make that happen. Posture, always look at posture. Posture and vision, that tells you a lot with athletes. You know, are they alert? Are they attentive? Are they thinking strategic? That's what I'm looking at here. Yeah, and look at Haley. As soon as she hits a level spot, she's back going. Now look at the boys go. So Matt, he's sitting there and he's just on the back of the shoulder. He's not 100% sure on where the finish line is. As soon as he crests this hill, though, he's going to see down into the valley. He's going to realize, I'm close. Problem is Medeiros is an animal on this downhill. But look at Fraser make the move. How brilliant was that? Took the inside corner. Look at Fraser taking apex to apex, corner to corner. Look at him cutting the corners. He's obviously concerned about footing, but what he's more concerned about is, you know what? I want to shave distance off. Wow, look at the pounding that they are taking. Now, Medeiros is flying, but he's also flailing. Fraser is in control. Look, that was a tactical look. Sprinting to the finish. Now, look what happens here. Frazier's done, but he doesn't lay on the ground, so he's not completely blown. Dave Castro is telling him, time to go. Go back, go back, go back. Imagine now you're trying to reconcile, but look what it takes. Look what it takes for these two to go. This is what they're conditioned for. It doesn't matter. They're just going to go back. So here, imagine you just did a finishing sprint at maximum velocity and you are smoked. And look at now what they're doing. That speed. So one of the things that Frazier is capable of is Frazier is able to run at around a 7:35 mile and recover. So part of it is that Frazier can do a sprint like that and then go out and do an active recovery and be at a sub-minute, 8-minute pace. That's legit. But they have each other now here, right? So Frazier, I think he's looking at heart rate. And what he's looking at is trying to get his heart rate under control. This is as fast as these two can climb that hill. Now, for the athletes following, this is a huge advantage, a massive advantage, because they don't need to worry now about going so hard in the downhill, creating so much damage. Again, that finishing sprint for Medeiros and Frazier, that's where the injury will occur. That would take them out. So much more controlled. I find it interesting that, looking back here, tactical, still in the game, wanting to know where Frazier is, but also wanting to know where the person is behind him. Boy, look at that though. So that right there, what you saw, that was mental, emotional. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what's happening. And to reconcile that. So to have a test that's physical, emotional, and mental, that's a good test. I gotta say, in watching the women run down, I'm very impressed by that because Tia and Matt trained together. So Tia right now is very aware that she's going to do an out and back, and yet she pushes this finish, which is impressive to me that she's attacking here. I mean, one of the things is that being a champion, you have a level of confidence in your body's ability. One of the things that we do all year is we force our muscles to do things. We make them do it. And when we finally get into a competition like this, our muscles are ready to go. But what fails us is our brain. Our brain is the one that sits there and starts creating this doubt. It's the brain that now tell the muscles to slow down. And that's a contradiction in terms of when we train. When we train, our brain is telling us nothing more than you need to go, you need to go, you need to go. And what Tia is proving here is that, you know what? Her brain's on board with her muscles. There is no hesitation. We're going to go. Wow. What a contrast between those girls right there. So Katrin and Carrie coming around and doing their flip turn. Katrin gives a smile. Who does that? Who does that? So this is where Katrin, with her pacing strategy and being further behind, had an advantage because she didn't have to sprint that last little section, so she doesn't have that level of fatigue, but neither did Tia. Tia and Haley did it more willingly. Katrin, with her approach, is now fired up, and that's the difference. If you thought this was going to be a 5K and it turns out to be a 10K and you're surprised by that, that's going to hurt you. For Katrin, this is a positive and she knows it. And so now the question is does she have enough time to chip away at these other athletes? Does she have enough time to catch them and to win? For me, I think about events like this, and the just pure grind, and that's what it is. And a lot of people don't like events like this to do them because they get lost in their thoughts. The truth is that if something is super short, if something is a brief time domain, then athletes don't have to think. They could just turn that thought process off. And that is very difficult for a lot of athletes to be able to think. And, like you take the Ironman in Hawaii, this event takes you 9 hours and you're forced to deal with your thoughts. And negative thought is one of the things that you must deal with. In long events, negative thought propagates. You basically accept it. And that presents challenges for athletes because you start making excuses for yourself. For example, if you look down and you see like, oh, I got blood in this shoe. I could see blood on the top of my shoe. It's like I must have popped a blister. And now you start dwelling on that. And how's that going to affect my speed? Is it going to affect my balance between foot strikes of right foot and left foot? For me in the Ironman, I would lose all of my toenails from the pressure of,
wow.
And the swelling, and they would fall. And part of it is blood was one of those things that was almost like a positive. Like, I can't even believe that I ran so hard that I popped my toenails off, that it was kind of like you're proud. It's the controlling of the negative thought. And that, if you've never done it before, it manifests itself. You essentially accept it. And now you're down that path. And that's what makes quitting easy, is it's a stair-stepped approach where you gradually give in. And long events, that's rough. And so how do you keep your head in the game? What you have to do is you compartmentalize. What you do is you treat different sections. And you say to yourself, you know what, as soon as I get to this one section, I'm going to do this. And one of the things that I would always encourage athletes that I coach is, if you're running uphill, you must have a strategy that you never stop on an uphill portion. But if it's downhill or if it's flat, you can take a break. And so you create in like 180-degree turns by going from an apex to from an outside to an inside. You can almost turn it into a flat. And now you can walk. You make rules for yourself. So what you do is you uphold your standard, your expectations on your performance, but you have rules. And so long as you stick with those rules, negative thought stays away. The problem is if you don't have a rule and you just start walking, then what's to prevent you from walking a longer distance the next time, and even a longer distance? And that is a sign of negative thought propagating, is the length of time that you walk. If it's random, then you're not actually negative thought propagating. But if it's progressively longer, then essentially what you've done is you've accepted your prior behavior. And now you're in that path, and that becomes a problem. You want to never let that happen. But if you don't train long, the fact is you're not able to deal with these types of thoughts. And that's what we see as a risk in these longer distance events, is can you manage those things? And honestly, that's where Katrin and Matt shine. They shine. So it tells a lot about athletes and personality. And I'm watching Brooke Wells come in, and she went off course early in this, and that cost her a bunch of time, and that would be highly frustrating. And now she, of course, has to play catch up for the rest of it. And so she's obviously going to be bummed here. But watch the facial expression. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, right? So her velocity, her speed didn't change. Facial expression didn't change. That look back was just to get back on course because she was going the wrong direction. But nothing. Cool as can be, right? All of her mechanics. One of the things that I see here is that, look, her shoulders, they're very relaxed. She's got her arms bent slightly more than 90 degrees. Which is smart. It's not going to create so much strain on the biceps with the hands coming down. But also it was her fists, her fists, they weren't clenched. They were very relaxed. Wow, look at this. There we go. So here, what we have is we've got Katrin, and the image quality doesn't look the best here, but that looks like Haley Adams to me. And what the heck? I mean, we're talking, look at Katrin. I mean, that is what we call an attack. Wow. That's impressive. So one of the things that happens in sport, in individual events such as this, is that there is what we call an elastic cord. And Katrin and Haley, they've taught this. They know that if someone gets a certain distance, they will break that elastic cord. And you essentially shatter the will of the athlete behind you. And so what you want to do is you want to really establish your authority by snapping that cord with some intensity, so that the person behind you realizes that you're a threat and you don't even waste your time in trying to chase me. But one of the things that Haley is very smart on is she doesn't play that game. Haley is aware of that game, and Haley is aware of her levels of intensity here. She has settled into a speed that she knows that she can manage. Haley is one of the athletes in the sport of CrossFit that can go out right now and do a 13-mile run and be good to go in the afternoon. A lot of people don't realize that when Haley got invited by Rich Froning to come out and train with him at the barn, she did the marathon row. And, what's funny is she did that row that day, and she couldn't come up with a better workout. That was the only workout idea that she can come up with. And she just wanted to do it. She sat down with one little water bottle and rode 3 hours and 15 minutes, which would have been, I think, 9th place at the CrossFit Games. She took one, maybe 40-second break, and it was no big deal for her. That's why an event like this for Haley, I think that it was hard for her to wrap her head around having to do these two distances. And I think that that's going to hurt her, but not the volume. This athlete, Haley, without a doubt, is the best conditioned running athlete in the field. There's not many in CrossFit that can do a 13-mile run and do it fast and work out that afternoon, let alone the next day. And Haley can do it. So what I'm seeing here is that Katrin realizes, Haley, I got to respect her. She's now a threat. She came back. And so what Katrin's doing is composing herself. She pushed an intensity into a non-sustainable pace, and she knew that she would eventually have to slow down. So now what Katrin's doing is slowing down in order to get back her cardio, get back in control of her breath. And Haley coming up side by side, you know what? I love that. That's an intimidation factor. She's saying, you know what? I know you tried to make your move. I'm right next to you. Here I am. And that takes some courage for a 19-year-old. Haley knows that Katrin's one of the fastest distance runners in the sport. As a matter of fact, I'd say that Katrin could run a 5:25 mile. Well, truth is so can Haley Adams. So if you're Haley and you know that, at this point, let's fight. I got to admit, they did a good job with this coverage, to be able to see these things. Look at these boys. They both look the same. They both just look shattered. So what you think about, again, like I said, is you compartmentalize. So they look at things such as just get me to the cone. All right, I just want to get to the turn. All right, just get to the top of the hill. And you treat it as individual little sections like that. And that's what you really want to do. You want to treat these sections. And that's what you do, is you just move through section at a time. So for example, like in the Ironman in Hawaii, they had aid stations on the run every mile. So what you say to yourself is, okay, run to the next aid station. And then what you can do is you could take 20 steps walking while getting some kind of a drink. Yeah, what they're having these athletes do right here is really, it's remarkable. This climb that they're about to go up is a grind. Now, the only nice thing about this is they're both dying. But what I want you to remember is that when you are going up a hill like this, you're not in control of your breath. Remember, going uphill, it requires power, it requires strength, and it's going to send your VO2, your breathing, your demand for oxygen soaring. And so when we talk about running, what we talk about is your cycle of breath. How many steps are you taking per cycle of breath? And one of the things that Matt knows is that he can do what we call a two-step count for the entire length of this hill. So long as when he gets to the top, he gets back into control. And what I mean by a two-step count is that he's taking 2 steps for every cycle of a breath. That is what we call extreme hyperventilation. And what he's doing is he's able to hang on to it because he's looking at this top of the hill and he's saying, I can maintain this 2 count until that point in time. That's going to take me roughly a minute. And as soon as I get up to the top, I can get back in control of my breath. And for Matt, back in control of his breath means 4 steps for every cycle of a breath. And so right now, he's in a non-sustainable pace, even walking, because of the duration. Remember, if you move long enough, eventually all your slow twitch fibers will hit muscular stamina failure. So then how do you get to the finish? Well, you've got to recruit those intermediate fibers, those fast twitch fibers. Now, Matt, one of the nice things is that a lot of the majority of his intermediate fibers utilize oxygen. So they're not creating this lactic acid, but he also still has to use fast twitch 2X, or people know as 2B fibers. And these are generating this lactic acid, this level of fatigue that's in his legs and flooding his bloodstream. It's going everywhere in his entire body. And so he knows that he's accumulating this now. He's got to clear it some way. And that will happen on the downhill. That will come back on the downhill. So he knows as soon as he gets his breathing back in control, recovery to the muscles is on its way. Yeah, that's good. What a grind. You know, you look forward and you see athletes in front, and it's like, wow, that is an incredible distance from one athlete to the next. So even like we're sitting here watching Haley and Katrin, just Haley can take a few running steps to get up to her. Well, that's not an option because they're already on the edge of the envelope. They're on the rivet. They can't go faster than that. They're really right now pushing to the edge of their ability. And so although it looks like, oh, just walking, the fact is that they can't push any higher intensity than that. And what would be the point? You know, they've got another 15 minutes to go. So I got to assume that Tia's in 3rd place here. And one of the things that we saw was Tia had a strategy of this is just a single distance, and she planned just for that. And she took risk. We saw her attack at the beginning, and she's paying a price for it now. You know, there's nothing that she can do at this point because she went for it. And you got to respect that she was told a certain piece of information and she strategized around that information. You know, that would be the equivalent of people, you know, imagine saying, okay, you know what, you're going to go and do 400 meters at maximum effort. And then when you get to 400 meters at maximum effort, it's like, oh, no, 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 just kidding. You got to do one more sprint lap and make it 800. Imagine the speed differential between those two. It would be dramatic. And so, you know, one of the things that I looked at afterwards is the speed differential of these athletes. What was their opening 5K and what was their closing 5K? And it's impressive. You know, we look at these athletes like Haley and Katrin, who are specialists at their sustainable speeds. They had a much more balanced performance. But that's not to say what Tia did was bad. You know, I would have done the exact same thing if I was Tia. I'm told it was a 5K. I'm treating it like a 5K, and I'm going to dominate like it's a 5K. To throw an extra loop in there, that's going to be a tough struggle for me. And that is what I'm going to have to balance, is the emotional, mental side. Wow, look at these guys go, though. So they've still got a long way to go, too. A long way. But look at Medeiros looking back. You know, God, he runs like such a kid, too. He's just flailing. And Matt's just so composed. I mean, just always holds. I mean, Matt is a student of the game, and he knows about efficiency of movement. And every single time when he runs, he is focused on, you know, that efficiency, that fuel economy. And you never see him break out of that technique. It's very controlled. So let's talk about this. So they just came down a downhill section, and now they got a little bit of an uphill. One of the things that's tricky for athletes is going downhill and then transitioning to uphill. It plays tricks on your brain. So I want you to think about when you're running down a hill, what happens with your stride length is it gets really long. And then the turnover, your stride frequency, it gets faster. So essentially you can go from 170, 180 steps in a minute to over 200, 220 steps in a minute. Well, the same thing holds true with your length, that your, you know, average length from out of 1 meter length, you know, on a flat can go on a downhill to 1.3 meters. Well, what happens is that when you go down that hill, you establish those movement patterns, that muscle memory, and then you start going uphill. Well, what happens to your stride? It gets short, and then the frequency gets less and less. And the brain interprets this as something's wrong. We're fatigued. And so part of it is that you may not even be fatigued. It's just the mismatch of your downhill stride length and stride frequency against the uphill. And so one of the things that you need to do is you need to recognize when that transition occurs, so that when you start hitting the gully, the bottom of that hill, and you're getting ready to start up that hill, you want to make sure that you are getting back more in control of your stride length. And more importantly, what you're doing is you're creating a transition in your stride frequency. So as you're running up that hill, going from, let's say, 210 steps per minute down to 160 steps per minute on the uphill, what you want to do is shorten your stride length, your steps, so that you can maintain that frequency and then gradually transition to that slower stride frequency as you go up the hill. Don't make it dramatic. If it's dramatic and it goes from 210 steps down to 160 steps, all of a sudden there's this massive mismatch and the brain's going to go, something's wrong. Now what we're seeing here is Katrin. I mean, she really, really is just effortlessly floating. Look at her breathing. So part of it is like you watch the breath, and this is not a cardio event for her right now. So running downhill for her, she's probably on a breathing cadence of around, 8 steps for every cycle of a breath. It's very controlled. This is more muscular. It's not a cardiorespiratory, versus going uphill, it turns into more of a cardio type of an issue. Yeah, look at her, right? Part of it is that one of the things that I would love to see is a tactical turnaround. So what I talk about is when you look back, there are tactical look backs. And a tactical look back is when you are rounding a turn, that what you'll do is you'll look over your shoulder and make a glance. And that's tactical. That shows that your head's in the game. Fear is driven when you turn around on a long flat section. And that means that you're in trouble. That means that I'm nervous that you're catching me. And a lot of athletes, they can't keep track of when they are in that situation of suffering, of extreme suffering, where they're no longer in control, where negative thought has now taken root. They have a hard time remembering where that athlete is behind them. And so they're constantly looking. They look and they don't even remember. It's almost like when someone introduces themselves to you and they mention their name and you forget it right away. Your head's not in the game. You're not tactically thinking. And so what you do is you look again. And so what you want to know is that when you're chasing an athlete, what are their tells? What are they showing? Their signs that they're either still in the game or now they're suffering and I could get them. Because you need to make a decision. Is it worth it for me to make all of this effort to try and catch this person and I may not even beat him? Because I got a lot more work to do. And that's what's unique about CrossFit, is that you're always thinking about what's coming. Who's behind you? What athletes are coming after you? But more importantly, also what events are ahead of you. Look at the steepness of this hill. I mean, the fact that they climbed up that and now look at the difficulty just going down it. So I like how Matt's going down sideways. Part of it is that, you know, you only have so much capacity moving in a linear direction. And so by him turning to the side, he's utilizing different muscle groups, right? He's using the sides of his legs as stability. And that's great, because what's going to happen is that when he starts running again, he's going to be using more of his quads and hamstrings. So strategically, it's of value on the downhill to turn to the side and move, so that the primary movers when you run are resting. And that's what needs to happen. You've got to give them a chance to recover. You know, you wonder why Matt hit his watch there. You know, we came on to 53 minutes. I wonder if it hit a certain distance. You know, Matt's watch, you know, it does tell distance. And so, you know, part of it is that he could be keeping track. You know, certainly now a watch comes invaluable. Imagine if you had a watch and you wore it going out for your 5K and now you're coming back, you exactly know how much distance is remaining. Exactly. And that information is important, you know, because now you're not guessing. Wow, he looks. So Medeiros looks just smoked. Yeah, and part of it is the swinging from his side. So look at the upper body swing. It's going laterally. Look at that swing. And part of it is that what he's doing is he's having to bring his legs forward in a different way. He's more swinging them around because his quads and hamstrings are so fried that to fly the leg around, the arm swing needs to change. It's no longer going from front to back. Look at him. So his toes, look how pointed out his toes are. So he's really bringing his leg forward with different muscle groups. Without a doubt, his calves are blown out. And so a lot of athletes, you know, one of the things they don't realize is that, you know, when the calves go on an uphill, you're pretty much done. And we need to know how to run uphill and preserve the smaller muscle group of the calves. And the way to do it is to take more of a shorter step and to not toe off, to not push off with the toes. Essentially what you want to do is you want to keep the heel down and shuffle. Don't push off the toes because the calves will never survive. And so what you're seeing from Medeiros is that he's trying to utilize different parts, mostly of the calf, and using the inside of it because they're probably blown out. You need to be landing flat-footed and shuffle when you run uphill. So not a whole lot of toe off. Now, what you're seeing from Matt is, look how beautiful the foot comes underneath him, meaning the toes are directly under the ankle. He's not swinging them around like a duck. That tells you that he's still got his calves preserved, right? He's got control of those lower legs. Yeah, I mean, Matt is just a mechanical mover. I mean, it's so fluidly mechanical. Wow, that was a move and a half. So there you go. Matt just made a move at the top of that hill. And maybe that's why he looked at his watch there, right? At 53 minutes, Matt said, now it's time. You know, now it's time for me to make my move and come to the finish line. And that would make sense to me. You know, maybe that was the spot where we have a mile to go. It's all downhill and I'm going to grip and rip. And that's what you're seeing. I mean, here's a guy that is flying. Yeah, it's interesting that watch look at 53 minutes. You know, that could have been a distance, and he's just said, you know what, I'm good to go from right there. And Matt, being one of the smartest, like I've said, I'm sure the whole way back he's thinking, okay, at what point do I make my move? At what point do I make my move? And it's not just a guess, not for him. All right, that was a tactical look, right? We saw him make a left turn, and he just looked over his left shoulder to see where Medeiros is. That's a guy that's got his head in the game. Again, it's a tactical look. He doesn't need to push as hard now. So part of it is that I admire he's pushing still to the end, and it looks like he's really working hard here. But Matt, at this speed, he's not sprinting to that finish line. He's just finishing. So watch the body language when he finishes here. He's obviously not happy with Dave. But what I like is, what is his protocol when he finishes? Look at Matt Fraser when he finished. He didn't lay on the ground. Wasn't all this drama. He just squats down. Matt has a ritual when he finishes events. He knows that he has to get his heart rate down. He knows he has to get his breathing under control. And he knows the fastest way for him to do that. So some athletes, they'll put their hands on their head. You know, they think it opens up their lungs. Some athletes will lay on the ground. You know, for me, I like to just squat down and take deeper breaths and get control of my breathing. And I know as soon as I get back in control of that breath, my heart rate is going to calm down, and then my muscles will soon follow and feel better. So Catherine, by this time, you know, she's made her move as well. And this is where she has to sit there and recognize that, you know what, she's got this. And this will be a source of confidence for her moving forward in this competition. I got to say, Noah did a really amazing job in that run. He made up a lot of distance in the back half. It shows that the guy's been working on his running, and especially doing longer time domains. That was well done. So Catherine's in her playground right now. This is one of those finer moments. You know, you make this left turn coming up, and she's going to take a look back, and what she's going to do is fuel herself moving forward. Athletes need something to pull energy from, and one of the things that Catherine's going to draw from is this performance. The truth is that it was impressive in what she did. She really, you know, relied on just her knowledge of her own maximum sustainable pace. And here she had a maximum sustainable pace for a 5K, but what she did was she doubled it. Yeah, that's a lead and a half. So look at her coming in. So part of it is that she's pushing, but she also wants to remember that when she reflects and she pulls energy, because she doesn't have negative propagation. Look at that smile. Look at the difference there. Look at that. Success is based upon confidence. And so part of it is that in CrossFit, especially at the games, you're going to have bad events. You're going to have great events. And what you need to do is you need to draw on that confidence. And so what Katrin is doing here is she's creating a bank. She's filling up that reserve of confidence that she'll be able to pull from in other bad events. And that is a sign of experience. She knows that she's going to need this win at some later event. So you can see Haley's fatigued here. You know, she's really trying, but she's breaking at the waist, and that's very uncharacteristic of Haley. Look at her shoulders are rotated in. She's essentially collapsing. You know, she's exhausted. She's really genuinely tired. Eyes glazed over. You know, she's really at the edge. But wow, you know, I got to say, you know, looking at her running style, looking at just her foot strike. Yeah, look at that. She looked good there at the finish. Really good. But she's smoked. So remember the ritual that I said. Look at how Haley is recovering.
Squatting.
So, and then what we have is we've got Tia. So Tia, you know, she knows where she is. There's nothing that she could do about first and second. And she's just keeping her head in the best space that she can. She knows that fourth place isn't a threat. And she knows she's got 2 more days of competition. So she's doing the smart thing here. She's completing the workout. Like I said, what she did was in the opening 5K was spectacular. She attacked like she should, and she just didn't set up enough reserve. I am, like I've said before, a little surprised she's not wearing a watch. That level of information would be important. And part of it is she has no clue on exactly where she is and what timeline is remaining versus Matt looking at his watch at 53 minutes. And, you know, maybe that was the point for him, that he wanted to make his move to the finish. But that knowledge is key to help you make a better decision.